All right, good morning, everybody. God bless. Nice 30-degree morning. Would have been a great day to go fishing, but I've worked quite a few days in a row, so took a day of rest to just sit back and just let my body kind of heal up a little bit, let my mind kind of reset. You might say, a lot say that I'm a little obsessed with going fishing because I just like being outdoors. I like going to the lake. But first of all, I want to thank God for the day. Thank God for a beautiful day that it is today. A lot of times we don't realize it, but you know, every day's a beautiful day. We may not always like the conditions, but the truth is that every day's a gift and every day's a beautiful day. I want to thank each one of you all for watching the videos, but also for, be honest with you, for all the comments, for all the interaction that we have. The truth is we need to interact with one another. This is how we learn. There are topics that came to mind to me, which I know is one of the probably most controversial topics there is in bass fishing, is what line to use. I know a lot of people go several different ways, but like I've told you several times, I'm learning. Even though I've been doing this probably over 30 years, I'm still learning. Why? Because there's so many different types, there's so many different conditions, there's so many different variables in fishing line that I watch a lot of little videos trying to learn from different people to see if maybe there's something I've overlooked. But at the same time, there's so many different viewpoints that I see people keep repeating over and over and over and over and over again. And there's certain things that I look for in the line that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. So I'm going to try my best to cover some of that, to try to not just be a generic, you know, well, that's what everybody else says, but to be a little more specific on things that I look for. Okay, and like I've said before, I'm not a professional. I just go out and have a good time. I used to fish a lot of little local tournaments, and I used to spend a lot of money on fishing stuff, which is very easy to do, and especially bass fishing. And then over the years, I got away from it for a little while because I needed to put a lot of other things in my life first, which God been one of them, and the main thing. And then little by little, it was interesting to me how God has blessed me and pretty much encouraged me to go back into the outdoors and back into fishing, and then get out of the house and go out and do things, and realize that you can go out and have a good time and not go broke doing it, because your whole mindset now is just to praise Him. Your whole mindset now is just to enjoy the days off. My whole mindset now has changed to where it's not about that daily grind to number one, you know, prove that, oh, I can catch a lot of fish, or prove that, hey, I can catch the biggest ones in town, or prove that, hey, I win the most money at it. And it completely has changed my life. So some of the things that I talk about line, some of you may not appreciate. Some of you may look at it and say, oh, I would never use that, and that's fine. Everybody has the different things in life that they're growing through and that they're changing. Some people, there's going to be things that I say, like just for mentioning the name of Jesus, that you're probably not going to watch these videos, and I understand that. Believe it or not, I don't plan on being a millionaire one day because I sit down and made little fishing videos. I truly am just trying to make these little videos, number one, because I enjoy it. Number two, I feel like the Lord kind of led me to do this to help, and just to have those interactions that, you know, and I just have a lot of fun doing it. So I don't want to drag the video out, but I just wanted to kind of give a a little summary to everybody, and this is kind of where I come from when it comes to making these videos. And the Lord has been blessing me. I can say honestly that over this past year, any video that you see that's on this that's recorded, there's some that I haven't been able to upload because of different camera malfunctions or different situations, but pretty much every video that you see, that's what I caught that day. It wasn't pieced together, it wasn't, and I may not be able to say that from years to come, but from right now, that's how it is. And some days I caught one, and some days I caught 20, and some days I didn't even record. I just took pictures and sent, because everything didn't work out that day, but God blessed me that day because I was able to go out. So anyway, let's talk about fishing line, okay? Number one thing that over the years that I've learned about fishing line is that, as silly as it sounds, fishing line is what pulls your bait through the water, okay? I know that sounds silly, but it's the truth. Fishing line is what pulls your bait through the water. You cast it out, you bring it back. With a bait casting setup, and that's what we're going to focus on, that's what I use the most. When you're using a bait casting setup, depending on the bait that you're using, really depends on what type of line that I use personally. I've always tried to get one line to do it all with, and I've gone back and forth between all kinds of different lines. And the truth is, there's benefits to each one of them. So mainly you have braided line, and you have fluorocarbon line, and then you have monofilament line, and you have a copolymer line, which is a combination of monofilament and fluorocarbon coated, which is a different line all itself. But I'll just tell you a little bit of the things that I've noticed. Braided line, I tried for a little while, and to be honest with you, on a bait casting setup, I don't like braided line, and I used it for quite a while, and I just don't like it. Number one, it digs into the spool when you go to pull back or set whatever and try to get a bait out. Yes, it's very strong. Yes, it's very durable, but I don't like it because when I went to use it with a jig, for instance, and I would set the hook, your drag, I've had it literally strip my drag in my reels before. I had a very nice Shimano Cronarch, and I used to have, years ago, I used to have 4 or 5 of them, and one of the ones that was basically brand new, it wound up stripping the drags in it. So there went that reel. From then on, that reel constantly sounded like it had sand in it, and I took it apart and looked at it, and it's just how it was. And you could say, well, maybe I didn't set it right, maybe I didn't do this right. Well, that's fine, but the truth of it is, braid to me is a hit or miss. You either break it or break something around it. Usually you don't break braided line if you have it over 30 to 50 pound test. You see guys use it at frogging, and you see guys use it, there's even a lot of people that use it to crank with, and that's fine. Anybody can do. This is just my take on fishing line, okay? So another one that I tend to use a little bit, and I tried for a little while, was the copolymer. Copolymer is a nice line because it's kind of a combination between fluorocarbon that you can kind of see underwater, or you can't see underwater, plus it has the capabilities of monofilament, so it tends to stretch a little bit. It's a good line. The only problem with copolymer to me is it's kind of hard to come by where I'm at. I have a bait shop here close. I can always go to a Cabela's or Bass Pro Shop, but I wanted something that I could have easy access to, that I didn't have to worry about ordering all the time. So my time with copolymer really wasn't the most. And to be honest with you, I really didn't see a whole lot of difference between copolymer and monofilament as far as y'all know and see that I throw a lot of crankbaits. So crankbaits tend to be around the rocks a lot, so do jigs. So you are in contact with them a lot. So the abrasion resistance to me is a lot like monofilament. So I didn't really see a benefit to getting it over just straight monofilament. And to give you a little background on monofilament, it was probably the line that I started using, because when I was a kid, that's pretty much what you had. Monofilament was the line, okay? The problem with monofilament back then is it seemed like if you went a lot and you went fishing quite a bit, then it would eventually retain memory. So that means it would remember the spool. When you casted it, you'd have all these little rings. Well, over the years, that's gotten a little better. Monofilament still has that, but I'm gonna tell you something else also when it comes to that monofilament. A lot of times in the summertime, so when the weather outside is hot, that monofilament, the 12-pound stretches more than the 20-pound. The 20-pound tends to be a little bit denser and it doesn't stretch as much, okay? It still stretches, but not as much as the 12. It seems like the higher you go into that thickness of monofilament, the less the line tends to stretch. I'm not a scientist, I don't understand all of it, but I'm just telling you how it is that I've noticed. So in the summertime, you hear a lot of people talk about monofilament line, that it's a little bit duller in the sensitivity, okay? What do I mean by that? That when you throw a crankbait, it's not as easy to feel the contact. That's what you always hear people say. Well, I use fluorocarbon because I can feel everything. Well, the reason you can feel everything is because of the density of that line, okay? The density of that line, it transmits whatever it's banging against a lot better because it is denser, okay? What I never realized, and what I've learned especially between last year and this year, is that monofilament line does stretch a lot in the summertime, but in the winter it tends to become denser because that water that it can retain, but also just it's just how it is everything outside. The lumber in a house in the wintertime will get denser because of the way that it kind of, the cold hits it and it tends to shrink a little bit, and as far as get tighter together, okay? Kind of like water and ice do. That's close as I can come in my mind to kind of picture that. Well, the interesting thing that I've learned is that monofilament in the wintertime also becomes denser, so also becomes more sensitive. I can throw that crankbait out and I can feel a lot of the vibration and a lot of what that crankbait's doing, what it's bumping into, and it has still a little bit of stretch, but it has a little bit denser. So believe it or not, that monofilament becomes a lot like fluorocarbon as far as the strength that it has in the wintertime. Whereas if you use that fluorocarbon, which is already dense, what tends to happen in the wintertime is it now becomes a wire to where you don't have any stretch at all. I'll be fishing fluorocarbon sometimes, and I'll still, even with my crankbait rods, I'll still have that back hook, and I'll have fish pull off. And I was like, man, why do they keep pulling off and they keep getting that back hook? When I switched to that monofilament during the wintertime, they started taking the bait deeper. And yes, you can go to a more parabolic rod, you can do all these things, which you've seen me use that Veritas. It's got a little more give to it than even my SLX rods. Even though they're both mediums, different companies have different parabolic bends in their crankbait rods. So that monofilament line has a little more stretch to it, so it allows just a little bit more for them to take those baits. Now, depending, I would use between 15 and 20 depending on how deep I was going to try to get the bait. Most of the time, if you're going to use a lot of the square bill crankbaits, 20 would probably be fine, because most of the time we're throwing 20, we're throwing up in the bushes, we're throwing in the shallow water 2 to 3 foot, so you don't really want your bait to go down that much anyway. Believe it or not, that 20-pound monofilament would still be okay throwing it in that muddier water, because they're not going to see it. Now, this is just something that I'm going to throw out there that a lot of people just kind of put a bug in your ear, because somebody mentioned this and it kind of surprised me. But then I thought about it. A lot of times we worry so much about the diameter of our line and we use fluorocarbon because we think, well, fish can see the line. But at the same, we'll throw a spinner bait and we're not concerned with fish seeing the wire on the spinner bait that is twice as big as the monofilament or the line that we're using. So just for instance, you know, a lot of times in the wintertime, people will talk about, oh, well, you know, you gotta watch your size of your line, and you gotta use fluorocarbon because they can see it, but you have to throw an A-rig, and an A-rig's got 4 or 5 wires twice as big as the line that they're throwing, and fish don't see that. The truth of it is, fish hit our baits better, I believe, in with crankbaits, spinner baits, different things, the dingier the water is. When you go into clear water, the best thing to do, I think, is the downsize or go on top or go to a jerk bait. Those are the 3 baits that I have noticed that in crystal clear water, they'll hit. A jig can be one of them, but in my opinion, a jig in the winter times, yes, they will hit it and they'll drag it, but a lot of those fish you'll miss because they'll slurp that bait up, you don't even feel it, and by the time you do, you got one hook with a brush guard, so the odds of him coming off and spitting it out are pretty big, and people are going to get upset because I said that, but it's just my personal experience. In the wintertime, I think that treble hook's a little bit easier, depending on how deep the fish is, which is a whole nother video. But anyway, that's just my take on monofilament lines. Okay, if you go a lot, and especially if you're constantly throwing moving baits, which that's something that has a lot to do, and this topic of fishing line is more detailed than a lot of people think, but trying not to overthink fishing like most of us do. Monofilament is a line that moving baits is good, because it tends to give a little bit. So fish comes up behind it. We talk a lot about, you hear me talking a lot about that parabolic bend that a crankbait rod has. Well, monofilament aids in that. So monofilament stretches a little bit, on top of the fact that it stretches a little bit, plus your rod stretches, so it gives you a little bit more cushion when a fish comes up behind your bait to inhale your bait. So there's a benefit to it, but there's something about monofilament that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. Okay, anytime you hear people talk about monofilament, they talk about how stretchy it is, and they talk about the diameter, but they talk about the diameter in monofilament about your depth as far as your bait's running. What they don't talk about is the diameter of your bait, of your line, your monofilament line, which I'll show you here. The one I use probably the most is just Trilene Big Game. And a lot of people are automatically, oh, well, that's the worst line ever. And I get it. Everybody's entitled. You can use whatever line you want. But the difference is, for about $7, I get about 1,000 yards of 12. And then I use the 20 a lot too. 20, which I use Trilene XT. I use it in 20 for my top waters a lot. But beside the fact that everybody talks about monofilament floats, here's something just that I've learned to think about, okay? If I'm using crankbaits and I'm using number 6 or number 5 hooks, then most of the time, that diameter of the line, because it stretches, I want 12-pound test. Why? Because it's got enough stretch, but it also has enough pull and strength to drive that little smaller diameter hook into the fish's mouth, okay? But I'm gonna tell you something else. If you've got a number size 4 hook, So say I've got a crankbait like that OG Slim or a 2.5. A lot of people's like, oh, I've tried that 12-pound line and it just, my hooks don't penetrate, or it seems like the fish come off of the boat. Well, what people don't realize about that line size is even with fluorocarbon has a little bit of stretch too. That smaller diameter line has stretch and doesn't have enough strength to drive that bigger diameter hook home, okay, drive it into the fish. I know there's times that it works out and you're like, oh, it's the best thing ever. But the truth is that on an average, as far as a daily basis, your bigger diameter line is going to be better for driving that hook if it's a bigger diameter. So on my top waters, as an example, I use 20. Could I use 10? Sure. But the problem is that most of the time on those top waters, I'm using a number size, it's a size 4 treble hook. Well, that's got a bigger diameter than a 6 or even than a 5. So it takes that bigger diameter line. You say, well, why in the world do you use 20? Well, I use 20 because I go to Cumberland a lot, and there is a possibility that a striper may want to take my top water away from me. So I tend to use that bigger line. But also, if you've noticed the videos, I use 20 because I like throwing that popper underneath bushes, underneath trees. So sometimes when those fish hit, I need to be able to guide those fish. Am I going to horse it out like a lot of people talk about using braided line for their top waters? And once again, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. Me, I don't want to spend the money to get the braided line and then take a chance on it messing up one of my reels, because I would rather my bait give a little bit. And as much as it would break my heart, if I had a choice between my $100 reel, you know, my $50 to $100 rod, or my $5 or $6 bait breaking off and me losing the fish, I would rather lose the fish than to break my setup, because I'd like to go back fishing again. A lot of us I know aren't that way, and that's fine. But to me, all line eventually is going to give. All line eventually has some type of flaw in it. Braided line, you get it around rock, you may not see your bait ever again. You'll have a little scratch in it. Next thing you know, sometimes we get overconfident, off the bait goes. Why? Because it's just how it is. But I've been using a lot more this winter monofilament. Another reason why I've been using monofilament, especially this winter, is that I watched a video that a guy made, and he was talking about that in the winter when he was throwing crankbaits, that monofilament was what he used for his crankbaits. And I thought for a second, I was like, wait a minute. It's like years ago, monofilament, I quit using it in the winter anytime it was below 32, because it absorbs water and then my line would freeze on my guides, you know. So I didn't use it very much. It's like I went to using fluorocarbon, but then I remembered that that was on spinning rods, not bait caster. So last year, I realized that I was using fluorocarbon a lot. And when I mean fluorocarbon, I use Seaguar Red Label. That's about the only fluorocarbon that I use anymore. I've tried all kinds of different brands. I've even tried, so there's a Seaguar out there that it's like a tan box. It's called a Basics. It's super cheap. It's $10 for the same 200 yards, where that Seaguar averages about $15. The Basics fluorocarbon line is an okay line, but it has the castability of a monofilament, so it's super easy to cast. The problem is I learned this year on those rocks at Cumberland that it does not have any abrasion resistance at all. Like literally, that line was getting eat up by the rocks. Like in no time, it was time to retie. So a 12-pound line was about fishing with 6-pound line, because it was not able to stand. There was even one day that I hung up my crankbait or my jig, and I snapped the line, and when I snapped the line, it snapped in my reel, and I kept pulling out line and it kept snapping inside. So it it's a good line for a spinning outfit. That Basics is, but it does not have any abrasion resistance at all. And when you look at the box, it doesn't even mention abrasion resistance. It pushes how strong it is and how much castability it is, which a lot of the strength in line, whether people realize it or not, it's because the line stretches. A lot of these brands, you got to be careful because their line talks about all the strength it has because it stretches. I watched a little video that a guy made on this Berkeley Trilene Big Game. The 12-pound test actually has the breaking strength of like 18 pounds. Why do they do that? Because a lot of these line companies are trying to promote that their line is the strongest. Okay, like this one here, it says on the very front of it, extreme fighting power. Okay, how can they say that? Well, because the diameter of that line is thicker. So that's something a lot of people don't look at. This is a 0.14, 0.3, looks like a 6 millimeter. So that's actually thicker line than a lot of other companies. Whereas this 15-pound cigar has a diameter of 0.13 and 0.33. So this is thinner. This is 15-pound test. This is thinner than this line here. Okay. So your comment a lot of times that I see people make is, well, the reason I throw fluorocarbons because it's just the best and da da da. Well, that's good. Got a couple variables though when it comes to crankbaits, and this is what I'm learning. Number one, in the wintertime, you throw fluorocarbon, which is awesome for throwing jigs, and believe it or not, I use this a lot on my bigger size crankbaits, even in the wintertime. So in the winter, if I'm throwing a crankbait and it's got number size 4 hooks on it, or that's the hooks I have on it, then I'm probably going to use this because we go back to that driving the hook. Okay, I need a bigger diameter line to drive the hook. But when I'm fishing those smaller ones, I use this 12-pound monofilament. Why? Because in the winter, what I've learned is it's just like everything else. You get kind of tight in the winter and you get kind of, oh man, it's hard to stretch and all this. Line is the same way. That cold air hits that line, and fishing your fluorocarbon is like fishing a wire. So when you go to cast, it's like when you go to work a jerkbait, it's like jerking a wire. So it's almost the same stiffness as fishing braid. Okay, because it doesn't have very much stretch at all because of the way that the material is. Monofilament, on the other hand, has stretch already, but when you use it in the wintertime, it still retains a little bit of that give, so it's easier to cast, it's easier to mess with, it's easier to throw. Another thing is too, is I may be out there one day and my goal is to catch fish. I may change baits 3 or 4 times. I may get hung up in a tree and have to cut my line off. I mean, I'm not the perfect fisherman. So when I'm out there, some days I may go down to half a spool of line. What am I going to do to re-spool my line again? This right here is about $7 for this whole spool. This right here is $15 for 200 yards. 200 yards on an average bait caster does maybe 2 reels if you put some type of backing on it. That's it. This right here is 1,000 yards. This right here can very easily fill my spool up on if I use some type of backing on 10 different reels. If I didn't use backing, it'll do 9 reels. Okay, so that's kind of the average behind it. That's the reason I have 2 of these in my box that I keep with me, and I keep them in different sizes, so it's very easy to keep that in the boat versus this one here. I have to spend quite a bit of money. The argument that you hear a lot of people saying is, well, you spend, $100, $200 on a rod and reel setup, and then you go out and spend $7 and you wonder why you can't catch fish. Well, that's probably one of the silliest things I've ever heard. And you say, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, you spend $200 on your equipment, your rod and reel, right? And the argument is, well, you spend $10 on your line. How many of us spend more than 10 to, at the most, $20 on the little bait that we're throwing? So, see, the truth of it is you're never going to spend as much as you do on your outfit. There's people that have landed, and I'm one of those people. I'm over 30 years old, and you can watch my videos just from this past year, and I've landed quite a few nice fish on 20-pound Trilene XT, which is $6 for that spool. At the end of the day, I would rather put my money into the gas so that I could go fishing, and that's finally a decision that I've had to make. Is which one do I want to do? Do I want to go out on the lake and have a good time? Do I want to get there? Do I want to put gas in the boat? Or do I want to buy the best line they've ever made? And then, unfortunately, guys, I'm just here to tell you, fish are still going to get off. Fish are still going to break your line. You watch these pros, they have the best line there is, and how many times do we watch the pros lose fish get off? It's just part of life. It's how it is. It goes back to that little word pride that all of us want to say that, oh yeah, I caught 10 and I got them all in. Well, that's great. I've had days like that, but I've also had days where I've caught 1 and I've had 9 get off for various reasons. So to me, it goes back again to where I'm just trying to go out and have a good day. I'm just trying to go out and enjoy the day. So in the winter, I've started using, and that's what I've caught most of my fish on that you all have seen, is this Trilene big game again at 12 pound. And it's been fine to get fish in. Fish don't tend to fight as hard or pull as hard in the winter time as they do the rest of the year, because they're also cold and they're kind of stiff. Unless you get a smallmouth, and a smallmouth seems, I don't think a smallmouth ever stops pulling hard, which is probably one of the reasons why they're probably one of the most loved bass there is. Like I said, they're all good line. They all have different purposes. Are you going to get a hold of a spool of this that sometimes, you know, it's got a nick in or whatever? Yes, you are. There's going to be days like that. Are you going to get a hold of this line and it's always going to be the perfect line? No, it's not. Depending on what topwater you're using. That fluorocarbon, I've used it for my poppers, which a lot of people say constantly, oh no, you can't use fluorocarbon for poppers, for topwaters. Well, I'm here to tell you that I did this year, and I caught quite a few fish on poppers. I don't like it for walking baits, but I do like it for the poppers. Let me explain why I like it for the poppers. You take that popper that normally sits at an angle, you put that line on it, that 15-pound cigar, you throw it out, and when you're reeling it, that line, they're like, oh, it drags the bait down. There's times that I want it to. I want it to drag the mouth of that popper down. Why? Because I get a bigger bloop out of it when it angles that line down. Plus, I don't usually let my poppers sit very long. I pop on 3 or 4 times and then let it sit. 3 or 4 times and let it sit. So when I get the bait moving, it's coming to me. But it's also pulling that bait just enough to where it's pulling that line down, which is making a bloop, 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 real deep sound. So at times it works. So you're going to say, man, that's a lot of information in a short little time. But I'm just telling you, a lot of people out here that I see, and no harm, that it's everybody does what they think. They make sometimes these different videos, and it's like, it seems to me like they're all cookie cutter. They're all about the same. So I'm trying my best to do just a little bit different than everybody. But at the same time, get information that's actually, this is what I do. This isn't a secret. This is exactly what I do. If you have any little questions, if you have any comments that you want to put, it really doesn't bother me that people make comments. It's fine with me. If you got questions, you may do something different. You want to put it below, that's fine. Put it below. Somebody may turn around and see something they're interested in, and it may help them. But this is what I use. Like I said, I've tried, I couldn't tell you how many different lines. I used to use, but that's just my take on fishing line. The main goal, like I said, is I may be a little different, but I feel like, honestly, like I'm probably the average fisherman out there. Guys, I'm just trying to go out and enjoy the day. I'm not trying to prove that I'm the best fisherman. I would love to catch the biggest bass in the lake, but the truth is, I would love to have the opportunity to catch the biggest bass in the lake. But the truth is, a lot of times I'm just happy to be able to have a day off. I'm happy to go out and enjoy God's creation. And to me, I used to invest so much money into fishing that, to be honest with you, I neglected my family. I neglected things that I should have been doing. It seemed like I was always scrounging and pushing. Oh, I need a few dollars for this, and oh, I got to save for that. And anymore, I'm thankful for what I have, and the Lord's blessed me quite a bit. And He's made ways for it. And it's, when I say blessed, I don't mean that now all of a sudden I had $1,000 to buy whatever I wanted fishing. No, He's provided opportunities to where me putting Him first, He's provided opportunities that, you know, I would have a little understanding and a little, my mind has worked better and clearer to where I may have traded one rod for two rods. The one rod that I traded may have been a G. Loomis, and then I got two SLX cranking rods, and that has helped me save a little bit of money to where now I have two setups, and it didn't cost me a lot. So a lot of times, because in the end, I'm not sponsored by G. Loomis. A lot of times we tend to forget that, you know. It's like, oh, well, I gotta have the best stuff. Well, a lot of times that's what gets us into trouble, because at the end of the day, my fishing stuff in my situation isn't what pays the bills, isn't what puts food on the table. Sometimes it puts food on the table, like for just regular fish, I get it, but I think a lot of times we get wrapped up in all that, and this is just my take on fishing line. So anyway, hope this helps. I hope this hasn't just been a ramble on, but I hope a lot of this information has helped somebody. Like I usually tell you, leave comments below. Tell me. I appreciate all the comments that people mention to me and send me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the feedback. Thank you very much for the prayers. I feel a lot better, and I'm just blessed to be able to go out and enjoy God's creation. I'm blessed to be able to have the ability to share this with you all. So just thank you all very much. Above all things, though, remember, Jesus loves you, and y'all have a blessed day.